Having heard them, let me now invite Mr. Rangesh Raghavan, Corporate Vice President and GM, India and Lam Research. He will be talking to us on building a semiconductor manufacturing and equipment ecosystem in India. This is continuing the theme of ecosystems. And so Rangesh Raghavan is a tech executive with global leadership experience in general management, marketing strategy, and business development. He specializes in advanced electronics, manufacturing, semiconductor technology, and alternate energies. You heard his colleague earlier today in the panel, and I think Mr. Rangesh Raghavan will delve more deeply into the subject of an ecosystem around manufacturing equipment. With that, I'd like to welcome Mr. Rangesh.
Sharada, thank you for that introduction. I sincerely appreciate the presence of everyone here today. I'm very excited to be a part of this very good summit. I've already paid close attention to Dr. Ajay and Jeet and company just a few minutes ago talking about the explosion and mega growth of the electronics industry. And happy to share a few of my thoughts on behalf of Lam Research about what we see as the opportunity for India with the semiconductor wafer fabrication equipment industry. I will be walking you through a brief presentation where I'll trace the history of the wafer fab equipment industry as soon as I'm able to share my screen here. Let me know if you can see it. Technical issues.
We are not able to share the screen.
I think we need to be. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see my screen now. So as the panel just before us spoke, our world is critically dependent on semiconductors. We've seen this in the news pretty much every day, talking about the shortage of semiconductors, and that shortage has meaningful impact on people's lives. And we've only now begun to realize in how many ways the semiconductors used in electronics are impacting our daily lives. And we've all learned new things about how and where semiconductors have become so critical to the fundamental society that we live in today. It has created new levels of both complexity and opportunity. And as the panelists just before me spoke, the explosion in applications for semiconductors over the past 4 decades has been nothing short of astounding. If you think about the number of transistors, which represents a metric of the complexity of the computational power that's used every day, we've grown over 10 to the power 5x the number of transistors since the 3 decade ago scenario in terms of the total number of transistors shipped with semiconductors. And we at Lam Research are proud to have played a significant part in enabling this industry to be successful. Very few people understand the criticality of the wafer fabrication equipment industry to the semiconductor industry in enabling this explosion of growth. And I'll take you through a little bit of history of the industry as to how we got here. In the 60s or late 50s, when the original pioneers of semiconductors designed their chips, they were all sitting together in the same room. The wafer fabrication process people, the equipment was made by themselves, by companies themselves. Materials were procured by them primarily from adjacent industries and shaped and modified by themselves. And they did their own designs and they did their own product development, etc. So that was the original model of the semiconductor industry. Back when we were putting a couple of transistors on a chip and they had very limited applications at that time. As the industry matured into the 70s, 60s and 70s, this wasn't good enough for the industry as customers wanted more and more complicated chips to be developed, they needed more sophisticated equipment that could allow them to do that. And it became prohibitively expensive, and the intellectual property needed to develop this expertise also became quite scarce. And each company could not produce what they needed on their own. Hence, the equipment industry evolved into its own separate segment of the semiconductor industry. Similar thing happened with materials, and over time, similar things started to happen with the design industry as well, where engineering design automation tools came into play to allow our customers or the integrated manufacturers to build and design their own chips. So an example of one of the early companies that came into being was Electroglass Corporation, making vertical furnace tubes that were used by the industry, horizontal furnace tubes, my apologies, that were used by the industry in the late 70s because their glass quality was unique and high, and no one else could match that. And that was the beginning of the equipment industry as we know it. And here is a chart I put together here of what the equipment industry looked like back in the early 1980s. And this pretty much traced the growth of the semiconductor industry itself. Here on this chart, you have revenues of semiconductors on the left axis and the wafer fabrication equipment revenues on the right axis. And as you can see, the industry grew ever increasingly reliant on the wafer fabrication equipment industry to support their growth. And it was this time where I call it the era of specialization, where the entry of multiple specialized players, such as the companies we all are synonymous with, EDA, Synopsys, TSMC was founded in this time frame as well. The IP company ARM was founded in this time frame. So we could begin to see the disaggregation of the industry. And this market attracted many players. What I call wafer fabrication equipment players went from about 25 to 30 companies to 150 plus companies by the year 2000. But then another thing happened, and we started to see consolidation of our customer base because of the significant increase in capital intensity of the industry, because of the significant increase in capital spending, technology needed to develop the latest semiconductor devices. Our customers saw a significant degree of consolidation. The top three capital expenditure spenders represented almost 60% by the beginning of this past decade of the entire industry spending on wafer fabrication equipment. And a similar trend happened with the wafer fabrication equipment as well. The top five companies represent today almost 80% of all the revenues in the semiconductor industry. And I'll talk a little bit more about what are some of the factors that caused that to happen and how Lam India is helping with that transition. And corresponding to this consolidation of the industry, we've also seen a significant growth in absolute dollars spent by our customers on wafer fabrication equipment. First driven by the smartphone growth here in the late 2000s. There was a wafer size transition that happened from 200 millimeters to 300 millimeters in this time frame. And more recently, the cloud, which has driven a significant amount of growth in the industry, primarily by moving from hard disk drives to solid state storage devices. And those are now ubiquitous in our cell phones, as well as ubiquitous as storage layers in the cloud. This has all driven significant growth in opportunity for the wafer fabrication equipment industry. So who are we? Lam Research, we are a global leader in wafer fabrication equipment and services since 1980. We were founded in 1980, focused on plasma etching, which is a process step in the manufacture of semiconductors. Just a brief overview of what we do today. Following our merger with the company Novellus Systems in 2012, we have a broad portfolio of offerings, products that cover the deposition process, the patterning process, or we call it the etch process, photoresist, removal, strip, as well as clean. A number of these critical processing steps, of which 400 to 500 to some processes using even more, like 1,000 of these steps in order to complete the full fabrication of the most advanced semiconductor devices. This takes, it takes a significant amount of R&D to create the right materials that need to be deposited. As my colleague Ginny mentioned in a previous panel earlier today, the periodic table, pretty much the entire periodic table, is now used to create the materials that are needed to get both electronic properties as well as the physical properties that are needed to support the patterning of these most advanced devices. If you think about what we do, it's such a technology intensive business that we plow a large amount of our revenues back into R&D. And you can see in this chart, our revenues have grown significantly, benefiting from the underlying demand drivers that I talked about. At the same time, we continue to grow significantly our investments in R&D. And a large fraction of that investment also happens in India, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Our technology spans almost every high-tech discipline that one can think of. Earlier, Dr. Ajay talked about a system is about both software and hardware. He absolutely nailed it right in terms of how we describe what we build. We build very complex chemical reactors that use advanced physics and chemistries and almost all the engineering disciplines, including and not excluding operations and operations strategies and operations research in order to manufacture these systems. We kind of fall into four major categories. There are subsystems that are essential to the functioning, like a heater, or a subsystem like a shower head that delivers gases to the wafer. There are many other subsystems such as those that are essentially fundamental to the processing of silicon wafers. We then, of course, have automation and robotics. We provide process and materials support to our customers. We build these processes and materials. Professor Vasu talked about it in a previous panel. We deliver those unit processes to our customers who then integrate it with the rest of their processes. And there's a laundry list of very important skills that are necessary for our industry for the wafer fabrication industry to deliver value to our customers. And in the context of what we need to build in India, how we think about India's opportunity in the wafer fabrication equipment space, one can imagine the complexity and the years of experience and knowledge and intellectual property that goes into developing world-class technologies that support our customers. And we also cover a very diverse range of disciplines that are needed to achieve this benefit. In terms of our customers, one of the previous panels talked about inflections that are driving the industry. How is it that we're able to get more and more power and performance benefits every year, year on year, historically through Moore's law, and now through the application of novel materials and novel processing techniques to help us to continue to benefit from this continued densification of the number of transistors on a semiconductor, which then leads to more applications and more benefits for the end user. A number of those fundamental challenges that need to be resolved can be categorized into sort of atomic scale precision, a number of things we do where here is a pattern of a very high aspect ratio. By that we mean a very long and deep hole that needs to be created in a film so that we can stack a large number of memory bits into this wafer, as an example. We also need to have very good uniformity at the feature scale. Now, some of these dimensions can be as small as 5 to 10 nanometers today, and in the near future going to 2 nanometers and below. We have to also then deliver not only precision and uniformity and atomic scale at the atomic scale, we then have to do that across an entire 300 millimeter wafer, which is about that big. A good analogy I hear often is, if you imagine a football field and your challenge is to mow the grass on the football field to the equivalent thickness of 1/100th of a human hair, and you have to do it across the entire football field, and it has to be perfectly matched. It's a great example of what equivalently we do with the wafers for our customers. And then we have to not only do that on a wafer scale, but we have to then repeat it wafer to wafer and lot to lot, and we have to do that over entire fab filled with our tools, and all the tools have to match with each other. And we have to do that for an entire year sometimes before we're able to take these machines down and perform routine maintenance on them. The sheer complexity and difficulty of solving these problems is what excites our engineers to work every day in solving these very complex problems. I think Jeet mentioned earlier, it's not rocket science, but perhaps even harder than rocket science. And some of the other challenges are around managing the materials on the surfaces, how we get that to be done without affecting the yield of the wafer, without having killer defects and metallic contamination, etc. And all this has to be done in a way that we can do in a sustainable, affordable way that makes the cost of what we deliver to our customer worth the investment that they have to do. And as I showed you in the graphs previously, our customers have continued to spend a fair fraction of their revenues on buying the right kind of wafer fabrication equipment. However, that ratio has consistently stayed where our customers remain profitable throughout this period. An important point to consider, I think a previous panel earlier in the evening discussed this, is that the semiconductor industry is a truly global industry. We talked about a chip crossing 70 borders or so before it can be finally packaged and sold into the final application. A very similar thing happens with us in our industry. At Lam, for example, we are fully globally distributed. We have a globally distributed R&D team. We have a globally distributed manufacturing team. And a number of players in our industry are pretty much the same. And we collaborate with more than 10,000 suppliers around the globe who provide the fundamental technologies that we need. And then they rely on their suppliers and so on. So there's a very intricate and complex ecosystem that has developed around the world, focused on specialization in each of the countries where this work needs to happen. And from a Lam perspective, we have chosen to focus in India on engineering, R&D, and operations. In fact, Lam India represents a microcosm of pretty much every function in the company, except for manufacturing, which we believe today, for the scale and complexity of manufacturing that we have chosen very specific centers to do that from, and we've chosen to focus on engineering and R&D in India. So let's talk a little bit about what we do in India. Lam Research was established in 2000 in India as a software-oriented organization, and over time we have expanded our scope of activity. And in 2012, following the merger with Novellus, we've just now celebrated our 20th anniversary. And in this time period, we have grown the scope of our activity, as I said, to cover pretty much every function in the company. Therefore, we've built the capability now and are in the process of growing that capability to be globally equivalent in terms of providing hardware engineering, software engineering, and the operational skills that are needed to put the system together. This is what we are doing in India today. I'm very proud to say that we have significantly added to the presence of Lam in India with the addition of a large number of very talented engineers, supply chain experts, other people, including communications people, etc., that are all needed to put together and build a large organization that can support multiple functions of a large multinational company. And we continue to expand our footprint. We are building a new center for engineering. We're calling it the India Center for Engineering Lab at Bagmani Tech Park in Bangalore. We, in fact, will be having a groundbreaking ceremony for this on Monday, this coming Monday. And we are doing this investment in the state-of-the-art lab to continue to increase our capability, ownership, and performance. And we expect to deliver technical solutions to our customers' most challenging problems, engineered from India using Indian talent. And this is a roadmap that we intend to continue growing as best as we can. And we are very excited to launch ourselves on this journey. After 20 years, we're looking forward to the next 20 years. As someone said in the previous panel, by 2047, who knows what this contribution is going to look like. With that, I will wrap up and take questions if we have time for that.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Rangesh. We have a couple of questions for you, if you can take them.
Yeah.
The first question is, we understand that there are a couple of startups in India that are focused on equipment manufacturing. Firstly, what kind of advice would LAM give them, right? And are you supporting this startup ecosystem to build it out and help enhance this whole thing for India?
Yeah. First of all, we're very excited that there are indeed a few people venturing into this very complex world. It does take a large, and I explained the data shows that the industry is consolidated because it takes a lot more than just the technology to serve our customers. Our customers expect 24/7 service. They want a global footprint. They want us to be wherever they are and deliver service within 2-3 hours. So there's more to building a company in our space than just having the great technology. So what I would encourage the startups to do is to find a partner that has that reach. LAM is one of those partners, and we also have a venture arm that does investments in critical technologies. We realize that not all technologies can be invented by LAM. We're always on the lookout for the right technology to close a gap in our portfolio, and we're very excited if we can find such partners, we'll be happy to work with them to bring their vision to reality. That is a long and complex process, as one might imagine. However, we're very open to talking to such companies all the time.
Well, that's fantastic, because I think that's what builds up, the technology. So we've been talking about silicon fabs for a lot, but then there's also a lot of buzz around, well, silicon fabs are one thing, but, can we build fabs for gallium nitride or silicon carbide?
Sure.
Do you see some of that kind of equipment being built in India?
If there is a possibility to start somewhere, that would probably be a good place to start. Although the assembly and test segment is probably an even better place to start, where the barriers to entry in terms of new technologies, the barrier to entry is not as high, perhaps, as in the wafer fabrication space. However, in the gallium nitride or silicon carbide or photovoltaic spaces, there are opportunities for niche areas where a company with the right technology could potentially get entry into that. I would suggest partnering with the institutes like Sensi and IIT Bombay, etc., who can help to validate these technologies and provide some data to the industry as to the viability of if you're considering starting up a company in this space, for example. Partner with those institutes first and get your product and your technology validated at those places. And that could be the starting point for launching something. It is obviously a much lower barrier to entry than the large CMOS, most advanced technologies industries, where there is a need for a huge amount of investment, a huge amount of IP to start with, etc. So there is, yes, a slightly higher probability of success, I would say, in these niche market areas.
Right. And I think in closing, one of the comments that came up in the first panel was about the barrier to entry, right? And I suspect that in the equipment space, that would be even higher, because like the analogy you gave to a football field, the level of precision and replication, right, is so high.
Yes. It is quite challenging. However, as I said before, we have, and in a previous life before I came to LAM India, I used to invest in such startups, and we've seen many of those companies succeed by focusing on what they can be good at, which is, pick a technology, focus on that, don't get too worried, take it a step at a time, qualify what it is that you're doing. And as you mature your fundamental technical advantage, the rest of it can be done with partners. This industry, as I described, it's a global industry. There are suppliers you need to partner with. There are market access partners you need. There are distributors you need to partner with to reach the customers. So there are a number of models available out there that have shown to work in the past, even if you just have a little bit. But the most fundamental part of that is having IP and having the right IP that is essentially valuable to the customers. You have to create that value first. You have to demonstrate that value first. Once you do that, the business pieces can be achieved. There are known examples of success in the past.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Rakesh, for joining us today and giving us such deep insights into a very complex topic. I'd like to now move on to our next speaker, Mr. Sukesh.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again.